I see some folks still coming in. We'll get started here in a moment. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 17 this morning, if you want to turn there. Be ready to read with me. Well, that sure was fun yesterday, wasn't it? If you didn't go to the brisket get-together yesterday, mark your calendars for next year. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. All right. This is our last session on volume 1 of our book, Amazed by Jesus. And what we're going to do is take a break. We've been at this for 6 months. We started in December. And here it is now, the end of May. June is right around the corner. And we'll resume in 3 months. So June, July, August, September. And we'll finish. And I don't want to give away any exciting details. I don't spoil alert. I don't want to give you a spoil, but the next half is really exciting. There's a lot that happens. There's the crucifixion and everything leading up to that. And then my really favorite part is the post-resurrection appearances. And we don't study those a lot. We don't study them in great detail. And I think part of that is you go through a big, long study like this, you're a year into a study of the Gospels, and that's what we're going to be doing. And you get to the end, and you're like, I'm tired. Let's just move on to 2 Samuel or something else. But those post-resurrection appearances that we're going to be looking at next spring, long time away. Remember, they are just life-changing. My favorite one, I think, is Mary Magdalene. When she doesn't recognize Jesus in the tomb. And she says, just tell me where the body's laid. Where is it? And he says to her, Mary. And then she recognizes him. She's overwhelmed with emotion. This is a lot of teaching, a lot of details, geography. But we're talking about the Lord Jesus and his ministry. And I've enjoyed walking through that with you. Last week we said, well, we're at the midpoint, and we are, the turning point in the Gospels. And we looked at the previous events listed on the screen there, Matthew 16, and today we're going to be in Matthew 17 and talk about the Transfiguration. We've got a little more that we were supposed to cover, but with some scheduling issues I got a little behind, and so we're not going to be able to completely finish Volume 1. But I'll remind you of that in September. But the Transfiguration marks the end of Jesus' Galilean ministry. In fact, he's not in Galilee. They're in Caesarea Philippi at this time. And that is a good 20 miles from the northern part of the Sea of Galilee where Capernaum is. And we discussed last week, both Sunday morning and Sunday night, why did Jesus take his disciples out of Galilee, out of the confines of Judea and Samaria, for that matter? And they just got away here at the end of the Galilean ministry. It's been 2 years that they have been with Jesus, and he wanted to get away with them. And what question did he ask his disciples at Caesarea Philippi? Who do you say I am? I should have said 2 questions. Who do others say I am? Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets, John the Baptist raised from the dead. And then Jesus really was after this. Who do you say I am? You've been with me for over 2 years. You've seen all these miracles. You've heard my teaching. And it was Peter who took the lead, saying, I think, what the other disciples certainly believed. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's in Matthew 16 and Mark chapter 8 and Luke chapter 9. It's easy to remember that this is the midpoint for Mark because 16 total chapters, 16 divided by 2 is 8. Mark 1 through 8 is leading up to this good confession that Peter makes. And then chapters 9 through 16 are leading up to the crucifixion. And that's how it divides. Matthew 16 doesn't work out as well. You need 32 chapters, but we only have 28 in Matthew. But Matthew 16 is the turning point. It's kind of the halfway point of the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is now focused on dying, going to Jerusalem. Luke 9, it's really lopsided there. Luke 9 has 24 chapters. But after Luke 9, really at the end of it, Jesus, there's a phrase that is used. He set his face to go to Jerusalem. That's what Luke 9 says, after this transfiguration. And from then on, Jesus is really focused on going to Jerusalem to die. That's what he intends to do. All right, so Matthew chapter 17 says that after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. What mountain is this? Well, the biblical answer is, we don't know. But if they're in this region, they probably went to Mount Hermon. Why that's not named in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, we don't know. But this mountain is the highest point by far in anything in the region. So if they went up a high mountain, 9,200 feet. That's how tall this mountain is. It's higher than the mountain Jerusalem sits on, the Mount of Olives. And so Mount Hermon is probably where this is, but we don't know. I want to read these verses. I want to keep reading through verses 1 through 8 of Matthew 17. Verse 2. They're on this high mountain, just 4 people. Jesus, Peter, James, and John. And he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, just lost my place here. While he was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. When they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Now, we've been going through the Gospels together. Would you say that these first 8 verses are characteristic of the kinds of things Jesus has done? You know, transformed himself, transfigured himself into some glorious representation. They're not representation, but actually they're looking at, well, you tell me what's going on here. What is the transfiguration? What does this mean? His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. Marc's account tells us that Jesus' clothes were so bright, brighter than anybody could wash them and get them that white. It's just glowing. And one of these days, I'm going to write a screenplay for this. And I can just see it all unfold. You see all the fancy technology that lets us imagine by seeing it on a silver screen or on our TV screen, and how amazing this scene would be to have Jesus glowing and his disciples seeing that and nervous. In fact, I can't remember if it's Marc or Luke, but they said that Peter said this because he didn't know what else to say. Isn't that interesting? Have you ever done that? Start talking when you have nothing to say because you're nervous or in trouble with your wife Because you've done something and you keep incriminating yourself? No, never done that. This is an amazing scene. What does it mean that Jesus was transfigured?
But in such a way that his disciples see the signs and emotions,
Yeah.
just a little something different. I don't think that was, it was just human, a bearable human way of seeing.
All right, one observation, and you can tell we're slowing down here. We're just looking at these 8 verses for right now, for the next little while. You've got Peter, James, and John. Why not all the 12? Okay, these are the 3 that he's taken with him on other occasions. Just them. One of these men, Peter, James, John, one of these men will see the glorified Christ in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 1. Which one of those was it? Well, John, of course. And when John saw Jesus in his true glorified state, I mean, he was glowing. He was a lot of symbolism in the description, but still, what was John's response? He wasn't just cowering and saying, "Wow, that's bright. Wow, that's really something." What was he doing? What did he think was about to happen to him? He's going to die. He fell at his feet as one dead, is what the text says. And that mirrors Isaiah and other people who had epiphanies in Scripture, or theophanies, I should say, excuse me. And so Peter starts jabbing, and what is this tabernacle business? Or these tents? Some sort of structure to commemorate this event. I always wonder, how did they recognize it was Moses and Elijah? Now, Elijah has some unique characteristics that John the Baptist also had, by the way. He wore this garment of camel's hair. He had the leather belt strapped around him. How they recognized these men, I don't know. I think with Moses, he looked like Charlton Heston. And so I think that's how they knew, oh yeah, that's Moses there. He was carrying the 10 Commandments? Maybe. Why these 2 men? Why Elijah and Moses?
Because that same scripture says they were talking with him. I think they recognized the 2 men because of what they were saying.
Okay, they recognized because of the conversation. Did you say something? All right, so why Elijah and Moses? The law would be represented by Moses, the great lawgiver, and Elijah representing the prophets. Of course, Elijah has also been integral with John the Baptist in his ministry. So I don't know. But Jesus is being presented in the Gospels as a new Moses. Yes, sir.
I also think that, the law and the prophets we think of as being a continuous whole, the testament of God. But in practice, the Mosaic law was what held authority in Jewish society. But frequently, the priests had been not up to the task of living pure lives and, rightfully carrying out the law.
And twisting it in their teaching.
And
yeah.
The prophets had always served as sort of a correction, not priests. They were like the truth of God, but rarely, if ever, held the authority that the priests inherited from them. And I think by having both of them in conversation with Jesus, that it's signifying that the contradictions or the controversy between these two sources of God's will was about to be rectified,
Okay.
eliminated, made whole.
Where Jesus is all encompassing, the prophet, the priest, and the king. We've been trying to focus on one gospel in these set of parallels, but sometimes these other gospels give us such an important, juicy detail. So I'm over in Luke 9, and I want to read these verses to you. We just read this same incident, but here we go. Behold, two men were talking with Jesus, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure. We didn't get that detail, did we? Not in Matthew, not in Mark. They in Luke 9:31, Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, we're still a year away from the crucifixion of Jesus, a little less than a year. Does somebody have a footnote there in verse 31 that tells you literally this is actually a different word? Not departure, that's kind of the sense. Exit from life is what it says? Well, literally it is Exodus. Whoa! That just brings up a whole new set of parameters here. Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about his Exodus. What does that mean? He's going to the promised land. He's making it possible for us also to go to the promised land. The true promised land. Okay. The prophets, oh yeah, and I was going to say this, and I loved your comments. I hope everyone was able to hear them. The prophets very much are elaborating on and applying the Mosaic law. They're not making new laws. They're telling people, they're prosecuting them like a lawyer would many times. That's in large part what the prophets are doing, elaborating on and explaining. It's interesting to me that the Sadducees rejected everything in the Old Testament except the Pentateuch. Yes, sir.
Well, I also find it interesting that as a representative of the prophets, or as the person that was chosen to represent,
Right, Elijah and Moses.
Was Elijah. And I think frequently when we're thinking of the most significant prophets to us, we tend to think about Isaiah, we tend to think about some of the others. But here, there's something peculiar about Elijah that God sends Elijah.
Yeah.
Which, perhaps should critique the degree of importance we ascribe to him.
Right. How significant was Elijah? Sometimes you read 1 Kings 16 through 19, or I guess through 2 Kings chapter 1. And I've scratched my head and wondered, well, why Elijah? Why was he the one? But there is a definite connection between Jesus and Elijah in that John the Baptist fulfilled the prophecy at the end of Malachi, the end of our Old Testaments, that says Elijah is coming and he will prepare the way for the king. And I think there's a lot all wrapped up in there. But Elijah, maybe he was more significant than we might like to give him credit. We would think, why not this prophet? Why not that prophet? Like Isaiah, maybe Samuel. But Elijah is the one who was chosen. So in Luke 9:31, we get this little interesting detail not mentioned in Matthew or Mark, that Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about his exodus that he was about to perform at Jerusalem, even though it's a year away. Isaiah especially, but other prophets too, show the exodus repeating. We call it a new exodus. It's never called specifically that. But when they were talking in the prophets about the Babylonian captivity and how after 70 years they would be released, that was like a second exodus. But the prophets also project in the future when Jerusalem will be restored to its place of prominence, high atop the mountains, over all the kingdoms, and that evolved over the centuries into this idea that the Messiah, the anointed one, was going to come and wipe out all enemies, i.e. Rome in the first century, reestablish Jerusalem as the superpower in the world. And that was a misconception on their part. They took the prophets too literally, but they do present it as a second Exodus. When Jesus is born, it's not Pharaoh who's trying to kill him, like Moses was trying to be killed, but it was Herod the Great. And Jesus fled to Egypt, interestingly enough, and then comes out of Egypt and begins, or lives in Galilee. There are numerous connections between Jesus, really the rest of the Bible, and that monumental watershed moment in Exodus. What is our national big event that helped make us a nation? What is it? Going back to our history, our 250 plus year history. The 4th of July, celebrating the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That's when we declared ourselves a nation. What is the event for the Israelites that galvanized them as a nation, at least what they go back to and appeal to? Well, the Exodus. Did I say something wrong? And you notice I didn't ask him specifically. I got a funny story I want to tell you. Yesterday, as Melanie was, we were cutting our brisket. That's what we were doing. So we went out there, we were cutting our brisket. And Tiffany was working on hers. And I don't know when I would tell this story, so I'm just going to tell it right now. It's not really related, but kind of related. But anyway, Tiffany was listening to us as Melanie said, no, I'm not going to cut your brisket because the last time I did, you said I did it wrong. And Tiffany stopped. I could see her eyes. She rolled her eyes and just had this look of, yeah, been there. So I don't know if I would have liked Walker's answer. What would your answer be then? What is the watershed moment for Israelites? Oh, for America. Okay, good. Never mind then. We're talking about this transfiguration of Jesus. We're looking primarily at Matthew's account, Matthew 17, 1 through 8. And I want you to think for a moment with me about all that has transpired recently. Matthew 16, Peter confessed Jesus to be the Christ, the Messiah. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And upon this rock, I will build my church. The apostles hear Jesus predict the establishment of his church. Not still there in Matthew 16. Jesus predicts his death, burial, and resurrection for the first time. How many times will he do that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? There are 3 predictions of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Very significant. He's telling them, I'm going to die, but then I'm going to be raised from the dead. And when Jesus was dead and raised from the dead, did they remember or really say, oh yeah, this is supposed to happen? No, they were overwhelmed with grief. But this has all been going on here. And they and the crowds have heard Jesus talk about his imminent kingdom and its arrival. And then we come to the Mount of Transfiguration, where these men see Jesus transfigured before them. This is a remarkable scene, and it gives us pause, and that's why we're trying to really do justice here. So these men are talking to Jesus, and the 3 apostles are overwhelmed. The bright cloud overshadows them after Peter starts rambling on about building tents. The cloud scares them more than the appearance of Moses and Elijah and the transfiguration of Jesus. And what does the voice say there in Matthew 17, verse 5? What does God thunder from the cloud? Okay, almost the same thing Jesus said, or God said when Jesus was baptized, which was the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And here we are at a turning point when we have almost the exact same words as Matthew 3. And what What is it that's a little different, Antia? Okay, so think about this. Peter says, "Oh, let's honor Moses and Elijah, and you, of course." And the voice says, "This is my beloved son." Is Moses a son? No. Is Elijah the son of God? No. Jesus is the Son of God, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, just like Matthew 3, the baptism. Listen to him. It's emphatic. In other words, don't listen to who anymore? Don't listen to Moses. We're not under the Mosaic law. Don't listen to the prophets. Don't listen to Elijah, or don't place such a strong emphasis on them. Jesus eclipses these Old Testament dignitaries, these very special, important Old Testament heroes, pale in comparison with Jesus. Do you remember Hebrews 11, the great hall of faith, we call it, where you've got by faith Abel offering his sacrifice, by faith Noah building the ark, by faith Abraham, Moses, and all these other great heroes. Who is that ultimate hero identified in Hebrews 12? Who's the one who's at the finish line, as it were? We're going to run our race of faith looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, really the beginning and the end. He's the author, he began it, he's the perfecter who completes it. The author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. That's exactly what we're looking at here. Jesus looking toward his exodus, looking toward not just the crucifixion, but beyond that as well, the deliverance, the new creation. This is a really significant moment. And so there's Jesus glorified before them, talking to them, and then Moses and Elijah, they're gone. You want to see that again? Okay, we don't have time. We sing a song, "I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean." Tonight in our application session with Larry, it's called very simply, Amazed by Jesus. Throughout our 6-month study so far, we have emphasized the response that people made to Jesus. They were never the same after they encountered him. Sometimes they loved him. Other times they hated him. But they were never the same after they met Jesus. Can that be said of us as well? Some of the words that are used to characterize people's response to Jesus is amazement. They marveled. They were afraid. That's another big word, especially in Mark's gospel. But various synonymous terms are used to describe people's amazement and marveling. Do we stand amazed in the presence of Jesus today? We have placed such a premium on our study of the gospel. 6 months. Well, we're not even done yet. We've got another 6 months we're going to do in the fall. Why? Why are we spending so much time talking about Jesus? Because we too are amazed. And while we appreciate and read and enjoy our Old Testaments, ultimately we're focused on the new covenant that Jesus inaugurated in his death on the cross. And we stand amazed at how he could die for me, a sinner condemned unclean. By the way, it's that song that I stole the title for the book, Amazed by Jesus. And so my question for us is, are we amazed by Jesus? And we're going to discuss that in more detail tonight. I've been looking at this chart with you throughout our study. With my new glasses, I can actually read the chart on that screen behind me. I know it's a little dark here, but you see these middle areas here, the early Galilean, middle Galilean, later Galilean. This is almost 2 months And I want you to notice something here. I'm going to zoom in. You see the line underneath that is in green? That represents Matthew. So the Galilean ministry is a big focus in Matthew's gospel. That's no surprise. We've been talking about that. The next line, you got a big gap over here for the middle Galilean. But that's taking the four gospels, trying to look at them chronologically and say, okay, there's a gap here. That's Mark. And then you notice that Matthew and Luke take us all the way to the end of the Galilean ministry. And then there's a big gap here. When we resume in volume 2, when we start studying in September, we're going to spend a lot of time in the Gospel of John. Events that are not recorded in the other 3 Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Ma'am? He's the dark. Well, wait a minute. No, he's the light purple. He's the 4th line. No, he's the dark purple. Sorry. John. Yeah. The other purple is actually a blue. Yeah, I know. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Look how little of John is on the Galilean ministry. That's why we've been looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke so much, and especially Matthew and Mark. Why am I telling you this? Because yes, we're looking at all 4 Gospels together, but they are individual books, and they do need to be studied by themselves. Each one has its own message. Each one has its own flow, emphases. But looking at the big picture of the ministry of Jesus, we see that he spends a lot of time in Galilee. And we've teased about this a little bit. They're called the early Galilean, the middle Galilean, and the late Galilean. The next major section is the later Galilean, Mark, the later Judean, which means there was an earlier Judean, wasn't there? And who recorded that primarily? Nicodemus, Samaritan woman, John's gospel. So here's John back at it. John hardly covers the Galilean ministry, and the other gospels hardly covered Jesus' time in Judea. So something to keep in mind as you're studying the gospels. All right. Oh yeah, one other thing I'm going to remind you of. Oh, it won't let me. Never mind. There is a huge, lopsided presentation of the last week of Jesus' life. So we've been going through this chart. We've gone through almost the entire chart. And then there's just, there at the end, just that little bit. Why? Do the Gospels spend a tremendous amount of time on just that little bit at the end? You bet. Jesus' last week. We have more detail about that week than we do almost his entire 3-year ministry, 3.5-year ministry. Any thoughts you have before we keep reading in Matthew 17? And we're pretty much done with our study today, but I just wanted to run through some of these last events with you quickly. But do you have any thoughts about this? Yes, sir.
Transfiguration emphasizes Jesus is the one. Singing how perfectly that's
Okay.
and it says, God through various
There you go.
various ways and
Spoke through the prophets.
spoke to us through the prophets, as in these last days, Son
Yeah.
will be appointed, heir of all things, who we make.
All right.
That is as clear as
That's very good. By the way, your visitor today, we appreciate you being here. You get 2 more comments, and then that's it. So that's one. That is excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
The only thing I wanted to bring up is that people have suggested in the past that the opening of the Gospel of John
Yes.
is actually John's rendition of the
Okay. I would add to that. I think I haven't really thought about it being the Transfiguration. I think it goes back to Exodus 34 when God reveals his glory to Moses. We beheld his glory. Glories of the only begotten of the Father. No one has seen God. I think it goes back to that first. And I'm going to look into that. That's very interesting. Yes. Maybe Larry can talk about that a little bit tonight. The Alpha and the Omega in Revelation. The beginning and the end. Yeah. Listen. All right.
And that's it. No, I was going to say the last thing also. The only other person we read of who was actually Moses.
Okay. All right. And it was that incident when in Exodus 34. Yeah. There you go. Going back to John 1. You guys need to get together. Work this out. That's excellent. That's really, really good. And I think everybody will be glad if I wasn't up here talking after looking at all this for 6 months. Isn't this exciting? We're seeing Jesus. We're seeing who he really is. And this 8-verse little section opens up and really helps to tie together so much that has been going on in the Gospels, but even prior to that, going back all the way to the Old Testament. Well, they come down the mountain. They went up the mountain, they come down the mountain, and I'm just going to have to summarize the rest of these, but I do want to read these verses. Matthew 17, verses 9 through 13. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Talking about himself, of course. The disciples asked him, why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. If we had any doubts or misunderstanding, Elijah, when Malachi predicts in Malachi 4 that Elijah is coming to prepare the way of the Lord, it's not literally Elijah who's raised from the dead, but it is John the Baptist. And we looked at this detail also in John 3. Elijah wore a coat of camel's hair and a leather belt about his waist and had a way about him that was fiery. And he was recognized for that. What was John wearing? Same exact getup. And that helps solidify the connection between Elijah and John the Baptist. He's not Elijah, but he is the last great prophet of the Old Testament period, as Jesus characterizes it. Elijah does come. He has come, and they did to him whatever they wanted. What does that refer to? Herod the Antipas killing John the Baptist, cutting his head off. All right, these are the sections we would be looking at. I am going to go over to Mark 9, show Mark some love. But really, we've just got a few minutes here. I don't want to start confusing us a lot. We're going to pick up here in 3 months. But I just wanted to touch base with you and look at a couple of things. What's interesting is when Jesus and Peter, James, and John get back, they meet the other 9. They're in the middle of an argument because they tried to heal a boy with an unclean spirit. And they couldn't. And of course, Jesus has to come save the day. And it is in this passage, in Mark's account only, in verse 23, Jesus said to the Father, if you can, you just said, can you, if you can do this, if you can, all things are possible for the one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. And if we had the time, we would look at that. I think, Larry, you preached on that a while back. So doesn't that strike you as curious? I believe, help my unbelief. How many of us have been in that plight when we're overwhelmed with a situation and we do have faith, but yet it's also being severely tested and we do not want to falter. Here in Mark 9, 30 through 32, also parallel in Matthew and Luke, is the second prediction of Jesus' death. There will be a third one. And he keeps giving them a little more detail. And what's especially significant about these predictions is all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, record all three. So I think that's very important. They serve as section headers in Mark's gospel, as a matter of fact. Payment of the temple tax, you'll notice that only Matthew records this. And that was so pretty cool, wasn't it? Where they come and say, all right, you got to pay your temple tax. And what does Jesus do? He sends what? He sends Peter out to get a fish. He throws his rod in there, pulls up the fish. Did I say that wrong? It's a rod, right? Rod and reel? Whatever. I'm not a fisherman. He pulls out the fish, and he opens up the mouth of the fish, and what's in there? 2 coins for Peter and for Jesus. Wish we had more time to talk about that one. Isn't that fascinating? Well, kingdom fever. It's here among the disciples. And what do they start doing? Well, actually, this is what they've been doing throughout their ministry. Arguing with each other about who's the greatest. Who's going to be the greatest? I'm going to be the greatest, Bartholomew says. Andrew says, no, I'm going to be the greatest. What does Jesus say? The greatest among you will be your servant. Servant leadership didn't originate with all these self-help gurus of the 20th century. It started with Jesus. He is the true, ultimate servant leader. Philippians 2 cites Jesus as the ultimate example of humility. Let this mind of humility be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, coming in the form of a servant, a slave. And he died for our faith. And then Jesus issues this warning about causing people to sin. He calls one of these little ones to sin. It'd be better for a millstone to be attached to them and cast into the sea. There's Jesus using hyperbole again. At least I hope so. He takes very seriously people misleading, like Walker was talking about, people misleading others to sin or discouraging them. I remember one time in Matthew 23, Jesus was scathing the religious leaders and scribes, the Pharisees and scribes. He was calling them hypocrites 8 times. And he said, you don't let anyone else go into the kingdom. You yourselves don't go into the kingdom, and you prevent others from going in as well, from believing. So there's a lot in those last sections that we don't have time to look at. But I wanted to go through the Transfiguration with you very slowly, deliberately. Got off schedule a little bit, and so we will resume. Thank you for going through this study with me. I want to take just a moment and express my great appreciation to Larry for taking some aspect of what we did in the morning classes, presenting it at night. He has written material. Started out going on to a 5th page, and I'd have to manipulate it to fit it on 4. Just kidding. You've done a great job. The material is out there right now for this last lesson. Over almost 100 pages of material. You would have had more if things had worked out, but outstanding. I really appreciate so much your effort. You're going to be with the young adults next quarter. Okay. Yeah, I do have this up here. I do have this. For our adult classes, starting next week, Shane, Ricardo, and I are going to be exchanging some lessons. I'll start with Bible authority, June 5th. That's what we're going to do for the next quarter, June, July, August. And then Sunday nights, I'm going to be teaching from Isaiah 40 through 55. I'm really excited about looking at that. It's daunting to think about. I'm going to study all of Isaiah, 66 chapters. We're just going to look at these 16 chapters. And they you know who they point to? You know who they ultimately are looking toward? Jesus, the servant. All right, and then we're going to continue our study that we've been doing on Wednesday nights. I'm going to be out of town for 2 Sundays. One, I'm preaching a wedding in Texarkana. The other one, I'm moving my parents here. I don't want to talk about that. So our June is going to be pretty major. But thank you. Thank you for studying with me today.